It's very likely one of the first names you'll hear when you join the mechanical keyboard community. It's both entry level and endgame. It's great bang for your buck, and it's a building experience without the hassle of scouring multiple websites for various parts. It is the Zoom 65. I'm your cool Uncle Marissa, and today we will be building and talking about this beast of a keyboard. Now, I kind of hate it when people call stuff beasts, but this keyboard, the Zoom 65, is really heavy. It could do some damage. It is not a carry it to work keyboard. I'm only saying this because I think this was my big first impression of it. I was like, this is really heavy. You could bludgeon someone with this. This is a home security system. But anyway, let's talk about it as a keyboard and not as a substitute to the baseball bat you keep under your bed. I don't really know why I bought it. I really wanted to build a keyboard, and I wanted one that I could use when editing and things on my computer. So I was like, oh, something with more keys that aren't hidden under layers. But then I got impatient and I got my Ortho 48, which I did a video on, and I'm kind of obsessed with that for that purpose. But I wasn't not gonna build this. You'll see the build process, but in terms of first impressions, I got the box and everything is very neat and clean and presented in a really wonderful way. There's instructions in the box. There's a case for the keyboard. They even include a coiled cable, which is kind of a neat addition instead of a straight cable. And there is a lot of foam. People talk about this keyboard being very Thocky. I can see why, because there's a lot of foam. And it includes stabilizers as well. And you just really need to include the switches, the keycaps, and ideally you'll also have some lube. So let's go ahead and build it together and then listen to it and then talk about it. I've already unboxed, but I wanted to show you what comes with it. So we've got a build guide, which in 2023 is amazing, not like a link to a PDF. These are the rubber feet. They come white and black. And here we have the battery, because this can also be used wirelessly. I'll talk about that a little. And these are the gaskets for the plate. Here we have our stabilizers. And my favorite part, the little Year of the Rabbit dial, which was a pre-order bonus. Look at this cutie. A couple of Allen wrenches and a bunch of different screws, all clearly labeled and packed. Here we have our weight. I got mine in rose gold and it sure weighs. It's very pretty. I don't know if the stain was there when it was shipped or if I somehow did that when I opened it the first time, but it's on the bottom. We've got a nice case for the keyboard when it's done, and the case and a bunch of other stuff is in here. I think I put that back in backwards. Look at that mirror back, and it is hefty, as I mentioned. The paint is really lovely, very even. We've got our coiled wire, which is a nice touch, especially if this is your first keyboard. This is the plate. You can see it supports a bunch of different layouts. Our PCB, it's already built, no need to solder anything onto it. And it has RGB lights as well. Now welcome to Foam Fest 2023. We have a ton of foam. This is the switch foam, if that's a thing. PCB foam. And we have the plate foam and case foam, who are very attached to each other currently. So here you're going to see that I put the weight in to screw it in. So I got a bit confused around here because the instructions assume that nothing has been put together, while the case does come pretty put together. I put the plastic cover over the weight to keep it in place while I screw it in. However, we do need to put the little threads onto the weight first before we can screw anything in. So I will be going back and doing that. So I'm just dropping the threads in right now. You can't really see. And then we will seal it back up again, and this time we should be able to screw it in properly. Now it does come with a battery should you wish to use it wirelessly, and you would install that now. I, however, will not, as I have no need for it to be wireless, and lithium-ion batteries do become spicy after a while, so you know, I just don't want it exploding one day. So I'm just going to put the case foam in now. And here we have our built PCB, and in another case of this keyboard was shipped more built than the instructions assumed. The top of the housing is already there before we put the PCB in. I'll take the cover off later. For now, let's test the PCB with a key tester. So it's plugged into my laptop now, and we're going to test each switch by using a metal pair of tweezers to apply each end to each part of the switch and make sure it inputs. That was all good, so I'm going to move over to lubing the stabilizers. As you can see, there's these pieces of rubber tape wrapped around the legs of these. They're supposed to do, I guess, what lubricant would do, but they also say you can still lubricate them, so it's very easy to over lubricate, which I did end up doing. The stabilizers in general also feel rather flimsy. They're very thin, but here I'm going to use some dielectric grease to start lubing up the legs. I talk more about the process in my Ortho 48 video if you're interested. So I just use a toothpick. You can use a paintbrush or a Q-tip to spread out the lubricant across the leg as well as over the bend. If you're going to do this, definitely use less than you usually would due to the rubber tape. I honestly would suggest just going ahead and buying better stabilizers than these. Right, now for the housing, I use this Cryox lube on each of the sides that the inner housing is going to touch the inside of the outer housing. Just a light brush on each side, and then just assemble them. And we're gonna put the switch foam on before we install the stabilizers. So I went with an ISO enter this round. I always like how big and juicy they are. It's like hitting the go switch or an emergency switch. Now we're focusing on the plate. You might not be able to see it, but there's these screws. We need to just twist them in. The plate is transparent if you're wondering where it is. And then that's the, plate foam. I don't, do these foams have names? and then we're just gonna screw the PCB to the plate. They do say in the instructions to be gentle, that you don't break the plate, but I have to say it is actually quite durable. Of course, don't mishandle it or mistreat it, but it's not a flimsy plastic. It's actually pretty nice. Pop these little rubber bits on the plate to help with mounting. This is actually weirdly satisfying. Okay, and now the Magic Girl SP Star tactile switches are ready to go in. If you guys watched my other keyboard video on the Ortho 48, I did initially try those in there and I really liked them. So I've been holding on to them to use on this build. And I'm just going to start with putting them on the edges. It does tell you in the instructions to skip some of the switches because that is where there are screw holes located to mount the plate into the case. Once all the switches are done, we can put the foam that goes on the back of the PCB. This one is actually adhesive and it took me a bit to line up, and I'm going to put it down the way I would a vinyl decal. So I'll just peel off a bit from the side and then I'll smooth the whole thing down. That way you won't catch any air bubbles and it'll just feel cool. All right, and now I'm going to remove the top of the case so I can actually put the PCB in there. The connector snaps in right in the middle. Now, another confusing thing in the directions was to put the wire into an indent or something along those lines, but I couldn't find where it was asking me to tuck it away. So I did struggle a bit with finding the perfect placement for the wire. I just tried to get it where there's no screws and there's no switches in the way. And then we just put the top back on, screw it in. The Allen wrench really adds to the IKEA experience, but I'm going to tighten all of those bits with my screwdriver too. Fill out the remaining switches, and we are off to the races. All that's left after this is to put the keycaps on. You'll notice I'm jiggling some of it. That's just to bring the plate up so that it connects properly to the edges of the switches. Let's not forget the feet. I wanted to do them last because it always feels like a finishing touch, and I went with white. And finally, the keycaps. I decided to try out MW Voynich because I feel like they haven't had their time in the limelight quite yet. But as you saw in the intro, I did end up changing it out just because the sort of earthy yellow tones just did not go with the lavender, Blurple is the name of the color, keyboard. And I went back to the Summer Goddess Festival keycaps. So we already saw it, but I have to show it to you again because of the law. The mirror back is very pretty. You don't see it because it's the back, but it's very pretty when you do. Now that I'm holding it, I am holding it very carefully because the volume button dial, it falls off very easily. Like as soon as you turn it upside down, it can fall off. I don't love that, but also in what situations other than this right now am I going to be holding it in any position other than flat? Otherwise, I cannot stress this enough. This is a big boy. It's a big boy. It's heavy. It's really heavy. It slightly frightens me because I don't know. I'm like, what if I bludgeon myself with it while I'm typing? I type too fast, it flies in the air, it hits me in the head. In terms of the layout, this goes without saying, but it's why it's such a good entry-level keyboard, because it's 65, which means it has essentially all of the keys you're going to be using on a daily basis. If you're doing schoolwork or you're typing emails, you're using it for work purposes. It has your arrows. It has the keys on the side, which can be assigned for normal things. Mine are delete, page up and page down. You have your number row. I really don't see much reason why you would need to use another layer except for function keys as a person who would be using this for something like typing essays or emails. And the weird thing is, after my very first keyboard was a Ducky, I don't recommend it if you're gonna keep it because that thing sounds so pingy to me now, but it was a 60%. So going back to a 65, going back up to a 65, is kind of overwhelming to me. I'm like, there's so many keys. Why are there so many keys? As long as you're a normal person, this layout should be perfect for you. And the case is high quality. All of the foam that's included is really nice because you don't have to do any extra mods yourself. It sounds beautiful. I have to say, it's the thockiness is a little too soft for me to be like, this is my perfect sounding keyboard. My Saturn 60 is still my perfect sounding keyboard, but this one has a very comforting thock. It's definitely a better thock for if you're sharing a space with anyone who maybe is not just titillated by the sound of mechanical keyboards like some of us. In terms of putting it together, I thought it was fairly straightforward. There were some things in the instructions that didn't align with what was in my hands because they'd already been done. Things had already been put together and it was telling me to put them together, and so it just confused me. It's helpful that they've already been put together, but it was just weird that there was that disconnect. But otherwise the instructions were very clear, and the fact that they came in the box, you didn't have to look them up online, is great. So I think that anyone who's put together, you know, IKEA furniture could ostensibly put this together as well with some attention to detail, and that also I think makes it a really good introduction to building mechanical keyboards. A big reason I got this one was for the dial. I find it very convenient to have a dial for media to change the volume. In terms of cons, I don't know, I don't think this is enough to outweigh the pros because this is a really solid keyboard, no pun intended. So one con that I guess is less big, especially if you are buying this as your first one, the stabilizers that were included, not very shocking, but they kind of suck. They're very thin, you will notice. I would recommend just getting some good ones and using those instead. The biggest con was the firmware. So sometimes you can just plug and play these. You go to the Via website and you can map your keys right there. This keyboard would not be detected by Via. So I was like, okay, I have to flash the firmware. It was very challenging to be able to find the firmware to flash. I feel like I found several Reddit threads that linked to firmware for the version 1 before I found the official firmware. And that can also be dangerous because they have their own proprietary flasher that I didn't know of. So if you flash using any other software, you can brick the PCB. You can brick the PCB. That, I feel like that's a pretty big deal. So I feel like that should be made clearer, you know, big bold red letters in the IKEA style instructions, and everything should be easier to find. Now, if we're going to the use case of super entry level, this is your first keyboard, I mean, you might not even flash it because it does work out of the box. If you're slightly above that and you know what you're doing and you want to map your keys, now of course there's the argument of, you know, you should have paid more attention, you should have really known where to go from the beginning through the power of friendship, but it wasn't very clear. And again, the consequence of it not being clear
was you can break your PCB.
But that aside, this is a wonderful keyboard. It's delightful. It doubles as a weapon. It's a beautiful color, beautiful solid build with one minor gripe and one, the stop sign needs to be bigger, but otherwise I recommend it. You know, if you want to build your first keyboard, this is really nice if you have the money to spend on it. Let me know in the comments what you thought, especially if you are considering entering this hobby. Is this a keyboard that you would consider picking up? Would you want something bigger, smaller, less beefy? I'd be curious to know. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this very purple video, and a big shout out to my Ko-fi supporters. That is super helpful to me, and it helps me get equipment to continue making these videos, continue making content for these videos, and just buying my cats churros. Thank you to Tim Bolognius for your donation, and thank you Chillwatt, Ninja Church, Windsucker, and Ryan L for your recurring donations. It is incredibly appreciated, and thank you all of you for watching this video. I've been your cool Uncle Marissa, and don't forget, Cool Uncle loves you. Bye-bye!